like to clear the channel of love for the self, deeper inquiry is required.
Yep.
And I don't think that that's something that INFPs don't want to hear, because self-inquiry is something that they might have even gotten trained out of.
Yeah.
Like, don't navel gaze, you're being self-centered, etc. And it's like, no, keep doing that. Go further, keep digging, go as deep as you can.
Hi, welcome back to the Personality Hacker Podcast. My name is Joe Mark Witt.
And I'm Antonia.
So today on the show, we are continuing our 16-part series, going through every single one of the Myers-Briggs types, all 16 of them. We're talking about how each type can love themselves through the lens of personality. And this week we find ourselves at the INFP personality type.
Finally.
I know, there's been INFPs that have been waiting for this one. So we're going to talk about how INFPs can love themselves today. If you're an INFP, you're going to learn a lot about self-love. You'll learn also about your type, because we're going to go into our car model from our Personality Hacker Owner's Manual in a few minutes here. So you're going to get a quick, broad brush snapshot of your personality, how your mind makes decisions, learns information. But also, if you have an INFP in your life, you're not that type, or you just want to learn more about INFP, you're going to learn a lot about them today as well. And then at the very end, stay tuned, because we're going to take one of the core learnings out of self-love for INFPs, and we're going to share it with everybody. It's a takeaway we can all have on the show today. So a couple things we need to lay down before we get started, though. Talking about self-love, we're going to approach this in a very particular way. There's some frameworks that we want to bring you up to speed on. We've been talking about this on every episode, so we're going to do that here as well. We approach loving yourself in a similar way to relationships. That's the broad, overarching meta frame that we're taking. And just like if you're in a relationship with another person, so I'm in a romantic relationship with you, Antonia, we're married, we're also business partners. We have many dimensions to our relationship. I'm sending you love all the time. But when our relationship has challenges, if we're in an argument, a disagreement, sometimes it can be hard for me to hear love from you and you to hear love from me, because the relationship has blocks. It's disrupting the flow of love. And our belief is that we're always sending love freely. There's no conditions to it. It's not conditional, or it wouldn't be a loving act, right? It's without condition. It's not like, I'll love you, Antonia, if you blah, 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 blah.
Right.
Now, we will have parameters on relationships with other humans, though. I think that's a normal thing to do. So even if you love somebody, there are conditions for that love to be expressed in relationship. And the same thing we believe holds with yourself. You are always sending love to yourself. Whether or not you can hear or receive that love is another story. And that often has to do, just like with two people, it has to do with your relationship with yourself. And maybe some of the expectations that you've set for yourself. So we want to talk about the relationship that is you, your personal relationship with who you are, how to keep the channels open for love to make sure that you can receive the love that you're always sending and live a good life, live a happy life, a joyful life. Because we think that if you're loving yourself, you're going to see really good results in your existence on this planet.
Right. So what you just said encapsulates three different principles that we have been using as the underlying premise of this whole series. The first one is that love is not earned, but a good relationship is. And so we don't earn love from ourselves. We're always sending ourselves love, but we're not always receiving love from ourselves. So we receive love from ourselves when we, like you said, when we open up that channel, when we're able to receive. So the first premise is that self-love is not earned. We don't love ourselves after we accomplish a thing or figure something out. We set the stage of receiving love from ourselves basically we start now, right? Love yourself now.
Yeah.
So love is not earned, but a good relationship is. And so we can earn a good relationship with ourselves by, like you said, setting good parameters and understanding ourselves, and what it is that we need in order to maintain a healthy relationship with self. So that's the first one. Self-love is not earned, but a good relationship with ourselves is. The second is that we are always sending ourselves love all the time, but we're not always receiving love from ourselves. And so the key to receiving that love, so feeling it, is to clear the channel. And the third principle is that we clear that channel by setting proper and appropriate expectations for ourselves, or what we're calling reasonable expectations. So if we go too hard on ourselves, if our expectations are unreasonably high, then we feel demoralized, right? We feel burdened under these expectations. But if our expectations for ourselves are not high enough, right? We're not asking enough from ourselves, then we tend to feel disappointed in ourselves. We know that there's more that we could give. So, this whole podcast on how to feel self love is going to be about setting expectations, reasonable expectations that help us clear the channel of receiving love that we're already sending to ourselves.
Yeah. We're going to use the CAR model of personality from the INFP owner's manual. Excuse me. I might have to clear my throat a little bit. I've got a little bit of an allergy or cold or something. I don't know what's going on with my sinuses. We're going to use the CAR model from the INFP owner's manual. And basically, this is just a framework. And by the way, if you're an INFP and you would like to go further in your personality type, in the growth aspects of your personality type, how it applies to career, relationship, and your personal identity and your worldview, it's an incredible program. It's very accessible, and it helps walk through the basics of your personality. And we're going to touch on some of them right now in the CAR model, but it really shows you all the avenues for growth and access. It's got a whole toolbox. I really recommend it. You get it over at personalityhacker.com. But we're going to pull the CAR model out of that. It's just a framework. So just imagine if your mind as an INFP is a 4-passenger car, and there are 4 passengers that represent your cognition or your mental processes that you move through the world as an INFP. That's what INFP points to, is these cognitive processes you're using. They're called cognitive functions, technically. For an INFP, you have a driver, a co-pilot, and then sitting in the back seat, like a family driving down the road, you'd have a 10-year-old and a 3-year-old. And I'm going to talk about these very quickly, a little bit of qualitative nature to each one of these cognitive functions for you as an INFP. It is not going to be in depth. It's not going to be comprehensive. I'm overgeneralizing just to give people that may not have that CAR model in front of them the ability to follow along with what we're talking about, have a guide in your mental mind as we talk about these things. So for an INFP, that driver process is a process we call authenticity. That's the nickname we've given it. Its technical name is introverted feeling. And this is all about tuning into what strikes you as a person, what is personally relevant, and what lights you up internally, what you pay attention to, what matters to you personally. And it's feeling based. So it's about core values, about motivations, about tracking your own motivations of why you do things, but also tuning into what other people are motivated by. It loves to express itself often. It's an expressive function, which really is tuned into the human experience. And the human experience writ large based on how I am personally going through life. So the more personal something is, the more I can see it as more universal in other people. So if I'm dealing with this deep personal thing, I bet other people are dealing with this deep personal thing. And this is really the water you swim in as an INFP. This is where your genius shows up. This is a heroic part of you. It's a part of you that drives the personality forward. And really, it's an important part. And we're going to talk about the expectations for this function, this driver process. Right next to that is sitting a co-pilot. The co-pilot for INFPs, we call it exploration. And this is the other strong part of your personality, technically called extroverted intuition. So this is about imagination, about what if, about possibilities. It's a little bit of a disruptive process because it's asking, well, what if we didn't have to do it the way it's being done? What if we could do it differently? Or what if we could invent something new, or take two things that are multiple things that are seemingly disconnected and connect them? What's new that we could create out of that? And it's an intuitive function, so it's focused on outward or external pattern recognition, seeing the connections between things very quickly in the outer world. And this carbonates an INFP's life. This brings a lot of optimism, hope, possibility thinking. This is an extroverted part of them that they can bring forward. And I'll tell you, man, with that authenticity, introverted feeling, and that exploration, extroverted intuition, INFPs are very powerful. They are really cool, amazing folks when they tune into those two great functions. So that's it, right? That's the good news. Well, not yet. A little bit of challenging news. We all have it. Sitting directly behind that co-pilot is a 10-year-old. We've nicknamed memory. Its technical name is introverted sensing. And this is a process, it's about the sophistication or certainty level of a 10-year-old. And so it has a little bit of proving energy sometimes, like it wants to kind of showcase itself just like a 10-year-old would, to mom and dad almost. But also it's it also has some mature parts. The challenge is it's uncertain, even though it has some skill and competence and aptitude. This part of you as an INFP isn't always certain on when it's appropriate to be used or brought forward. And so you have a very unique relationship often with this as an INFP. This part of you, it's kind of a weird push-pull. Sometimes you overdo it, sometimes you underdo it. You just have a lot of uncertainty here, but it's an important part of who you are. And this function is all about precedent, how you came to be who you are over time. It can track things like personal changes to you, but it also tracks societal changes. It's tuned into like, what's the precedent here? What has been done before? What templates could I look at? If the co-pilot of exploration is all disruptive and what can we do that hasn't already been done? This is saying, well, what has been done? And what can I attune to that already exists, that I already know about, that I can be certain on? So that's what this part of you is very focused on. And then the other challenging news is that 3-year-old sitting directly behind the driver. For you as an INFP, we've nicknamed this effectiveness. Its technical name is extroverted thinking. This is all about getting real world results and accomplishing things in the world, getting projects done, getting output. The question this part of you is asking is what works, what gets the job done. I don't care how anybody feels, even me, what actually gets the result I need. It's focused on things like resource management, calendars, timelines, schedules, anything in the outer world that needs to be coordinated to produce a result is what this part of you is focused on. We put it about 3 years old though, because it is deeply uncertain. And even if you are in a job, which many INFPs find themselves in, where this part of you is exercised and you've built skill here, you might rely on this a lot. It doesn't matter how much skill, competence, or proficiency you have built here, you will always feel a bit of uncertainty, deep uncertainty in this part of who you are. So it has to be mitigated. And there's some things that it can create challenges in your life around, but also some things that can really be positive and aspirational about this aspect of you as an INFP. So that's the car model of an INFP. And we're going to talk about each one of those positions one at a time. And we're going to talk about the proper expectations that you should have for each one of these, because they're not all the same. Different parts of you. And what's great about INFPs is they have a sense of the parts of them, right? That authenticity we're going to talk about first. It kind of sees the inner terrain as all these voices, all these conflicting motivations, desires, and drives that have to come in alignment under the INFP to be able to execute or act in the world. So we're going to turn to the driver function first. And Antonia, let's tune into that. And let's start talking about what are some of the expectations that an INFP can have for themselves with authenticity.
Yeah. So just as a note, you talked about the deep uncertainty of that 3-year-old function. It's technically called the inferior function. Also the uncertainty of the 10-year-old. And it's important to understand that there is a descending order of certainty with each of these functions. The driver function, or what's called the dominant function, has a high degree of certainty.
110%.
Yeah, almost overconfidence. The co-pilot or the auxiliary function has a modest sense of certainty.
95%, right? I don't know why I'm giving percentages.
I don't know.
That's like my mind's like patterning this.
The 10-year-old is uncertain, but it has ways of trying to cover uncertainty. And then the 3-year-old or inferior function, and that 10-year-old is also called the tertiary. And then the 3-year-old inferior function experiences deep uncertainty.
Yeah.
And we as humans, we don't like uncertainty. We'll do just about anything to go back to feeling certain. And when we do feel certain, we have a tendency to believe that it's all green lights. So when we feel uncertain, it's a red flag. When we feel certain, it's a green light. And that means that whenever we're in a function or using a function that makes us feel that sense of confidence and certainty, we should have higher expectations for it, because there's not something that is undermining our ability to perform at its best. Nothing is throttling it. So as we go down, we're going to track that descending order of certainty with a descending order of expectation as well. So when we start with the driver function, the dominant function of introverted feeling or authenticity, INFPs should have very high expectations for this function. It's a natural talent, and it is something that people with INFP preferences spend their whole life clocking hours doing. So the expectation should be that they perform it. They don't just perform it, but they perform it well. Now, you talked about some of the qualities and characteristics of this function, and it's worth noting that it's a decision-making function based, effectively on the question, how do I feel about this? Right? How is this making me feel? So, because this is such a personal, subjective, feeling-oriented function, the high expectation on this is that you're going to have deep self-reflection. And that means that you're not just uh, registering how something makes you feel. You're registering why it makes you feel that way. You're going into a deeper inner terrain. You're really trying to unearth your values, your deeper motivations, your intentions. What is the fabric? What is the makeup of who you are as a person? Right? What is underneath just your feelings? What's your identity? And why does this thing make you feel the way that it makes you feel? What are all of the different components to it? There's a phrase that I use a lot for myself because I use a function called introverted thinking or accuracy. And when I was sort of upping my game with that function, I trained myself to remember the phrase "Don't believe everything you think," because sometimes my first impulsive thought doesn't give me a full picture. It doesn't tell me a whole story, and in fact, it gives me partial information to a point where it might sound right, but it actually needs a lot more consideration to be a complete thought. And it struck me that for people who use introverted feeling or authenticity, even though it is their criteria for making decisions, I still think that there's a corollary here that could be said, don't believe everything you feel. And that's not to say that you don't trust your feelings. And it's not to say that you don't pay attention to them. You must pay attention to them. They're incredibly important and they come with lots of important information. But you don't believe that first impulsive feeling. Right? You don't believe it because it almost always comes with a story or a narrative. That feeling does. I feel this way because, and then we'll associate that feeling with like the first rationalization or first narrative that feels attached to it. For somebody with these functions to have high expectations for it, to have high expectations for introverted feeling or authenticity means diving deeper into that narrative and story. And really, actually, the best training I see is people who have this function. They recognize the need to process an emotion, maybe even separate from a story or a narrative. They're not looking for the blame. They're not looking for the thing that triggered them. They're not seeking a story of like, I feel this way because you did this to me. They recognize that these feelings are coming from within. They recognize that something triggered something that already existed inside of them. And they're not believing the story, the first story that pops up. They're going into a deeper narrative, a deeper truth, a deeper understanding of self that may or may not have anything to do with the thing that triggered it. So that high expectation is a high expectation for self-knowledge, a high expectation for self-inquiry, a real understanding of the makeup of the individual.
Yeah. I sometimes experience INFPs, immature INFPs that maybe haven't done a lot of growth work as very self-referenced, sometimes to the point of being selfish. And I think it's actually not, I don't think the instinct is to be selfish. I actually think the instinct for an INFP is to be very giving and open-hearted. I really do. Unfortunately, though, this mental process of authenticity, it cannot know another person's experience emotionally unless it has experienced the same or similar emotion. And so it's almost like when an authenticity process, like I have this as well, I'm an ENFP. When someone's feeling something emotional, I don't go, oh, they're feeling and I'm feeling what they're feeling. I immediately tune in, and I think INFPs do this too, and they go, well, if I was that person in that situation with all these things going on, here's how I would be feeling. Oh, they must be feeling bad or angry, or that's how I'd be feeling. It's almost like a tuning fork. Like you're tuning into what they're doing and you're finding it within yourself to approximate it and go, that must be what they're experiencing. And I called INFPs, maybe they're immature, a little selfish. Well, I also have been selfish in my life too, in the same way. So I'm not picking on INFPs. I'll just speak from my own experience with this process, this authenticity process. If I don't know what it's like, it's almost like I'm cold. I try to find anything that could approximate it. But when I was younger, especially, I would say things to people and I'd be very cold to their struggle or their trauma or whatever they were dealing with because I had no reference experience for that. And we're going to get into this when we talk about exploration in a moment, when we talk about the co-pilot, because that's one of the things that helps with this. But the expectation is that you're going to have run through enough emotions and enough emotional situations for yourself that when somebody in your presence, this is what maturity is for this process. When somebody's struggling with something, you have an emotion as approximate as possible to tune into for yourself to go, wow, that must be tough for them, or that must be awesome for them, or that must be fill in whatever that emotional experience is because you've gone through something similar. But if you cut yourself off from experiences and you don't let this part of yourself exercise with all those different, emotions, experiences, and processing, you're not going to always be tuned to other people. And you probably are going to have even yourself you won't be tuned to, right? Even you're going to cut yourself off. You experience something really out of frame and you haven't kind of built other approximate emotions. It might overwhelm your systems. You might collapse under the weight of it or something. So it also is around self-love, not just a relation to other people. But when it comes back to you, you're going to need the same mechanism to go, oh, I know I've seen this before. And it's not the exact same situation, but I have enough reference experiences around the situation to know it's probably going to be okay. I can process through this. I've seen myself overcome this. I know what it's going to be like on the other side. I know I can deal with this because I've dealt with something very similar. Just like when you're tuning into yourself to understand what's going on for somebody else, you can do the same for yourself as well. I think it's very important.
Yeah. You're basically talking about what you could call emotional cartography.
Yeah.
Right. You are mapping your own emotional range and understanding what it means to feel a certain way.
Yeah.
Right. And so you don't necessarily have to have experienced the exact same thing another person is experiencing to understand what some of those basic emotions are.
Yeah.
And to be able to read it. The person is maybe acting in a certain way, but the emotion they're experiencing is, say, loneliness or disconnection or, a feeling of being abandoned, right? Like these are all experiences people have. And so when you have charted that within the self and you know what it feels like to be lonely or, feel abandoned, then when another person is expressing that, you can immediately feel sympathetic because you've already seen it in yourself. And this is actually one of the reasons why I think people with this function might not set high expectations for themselves in this way, because they know that they will be sympathetic to maybe even people who don't share their values.
Yeah.
And so that can get into murky territory. But that leads me to the second thing that I believe that setting high expectations requires of introverted feeling or authenticity, which is to be very clear about what your values are, right? Like, what are your values? What are the things that are important to you? What does it mean to be in alignment with the deeper parts of who you are? How do you live that way? How do you show up and evidence that? And so when you run into these seeming contradictions where you're highly sympathetic of somebody who maybe doesn't share your values, but you are a person who knows what your values are and are trying to live in alignment with it, how do you reconcile those two things?
Yeah.
And that isn't easy. And yet that requires even deeper inquiry.
Yep.
Right. Where is the disconnect? Where's the difference here? Is it okay to be sympathetic of people who maybe share, have values that are 180 degrees from yours? And only you can come to a conclusion on that. Only you can determine and decide whether or not you're going to share your sympathy with all or part it out. And it really is a subjective call, right? It's like it's your own personal judgment on how you're going to do that. And it requires some thought labor. It requires some real self-inquiry labor. And that's a high expectation. The high expectation is that you won't skim over those dilemmas, those challenges, those problems, the things that don't really feel like they have a reconciliation, but they do if you keep inquiring. And sometimes it takes years to come to conclusions on things, but that's okay because you are requiring of yourself to not just brush over or skirt over things that are harder ethical, ethical considerations.
And I think the most mature introverted feeling or authenticity has the most gray in it.
Mm-hmm.
It's at least black and white.
Yeah.
If you have really clear black and white, right and wrong thinking, you're probably not stretching this as far as you could. You can have higher expectations for yourself here, because if it's mature, it's going to realize, and this is the thing that authenticity knows, nothing comes from one motivation or drive. Everything is a cocktail, a consortium of motivations. And just like with gold, the gold metal, it has impurities in it. Mm-hmm. If it was pure gold, it would be useless. Mm-hmm. The impurities make it strong as a metal, right? It makes it useful in some way. And you can't get pure. I mean, I don't think you can even, I don't know if it's possible. I'm sure maybe science can do it now, but it's going to be hard to do.
Well, it's just really soft.
Yeah. And you realize that part of your maturity as an authenticity person, as an INFP, is the fact that everything you do, you're fully aware that you have good, quote unquote, good or positive motivations, but also some challenging or negative motivations. And things that you do that are negative, you also have some positive motivation. Like nothing's one thing. All this gray area. And you realize, oh, no one, including me, is acting from purity or perfectness. Oh, and that's an expansive, mature authenticity for an INFP, I believe.
Yeah. And that said, that doesn't mean that the mature or seasoned or high expectation version of this function doesn't have strong morals.
Of course.
Or a strong, moral compass.
Conviction even.
Conviction. That's right. Those are all things. In fact, actually, the high expectation is that something will light your passion.
Yep.
Something will create a sense of conviction. It can be moral conviction or it can be creative conviction. It can be a desire for self-expression, or it could be something that you're doing ethical advocacy around. It really can be anything, but having a high expectation for this function is finding your passion and not allowing yourself to be dysthymic, not allowing yourself to be somebody who just kind of rolls over and, doesn't really have that centerpiece of grit that you're talking about.
Anything else for this driver before we move on to the co-pilot?
There's a couple different things that a high expectation will set. Emotional regulation, like being able to regulate your own emotional experience. And that usually means having discovered a creative expression or a creative outlet. So basically not making your emotions other people's problem, while at the same time not bottling them up. So there's a healthy way of self-expression, and there's also a way of not making yourself the center point of everything. And having a high expectation for this function means finding that balance. So, and that doesn't mean, everybody gets, what do we call it? A minute to be human, right? Like something makes you mad and you act angry. That's, everybody has that. But it's not feeling like other people need to help you emotionally regulate, right? Like the performance of emotions oftentimes is seeking the outside world to help or assist with that regulation. And that needs to be brought in-house. And that creative expression, though, also puts an expectation on being able to communicate. Now, that's a challenge because this function, a lot of it is languageless, right? It's just a feeling. How do you communicate a feeling? And how do you articulate things that are so complicated and so difficult? And high expectations for this function means finding a way to experience clear communication. And that might just be figuring out a way to communicate your values clearly or to communicate your experience. It doesn't have to be the fidelity of communicating every emotion, but in a way where you do feel understood, right? Like you can communicate in a way that other people can understand you. And that onus is on you. Sometimes it's very difficult to do. And I can appreciate why it would feel like nobody's listening to me. But if you can figure out a way to express that other people can receive, then you'll find yourself able to feel that, that understanding and to feel more validated. And that's the last piece is figuring out a way to self-validate. Right. And oftentimes INFPs can self-validate in their convictions and the things they think are right. They will fight for the things that are important to them. But sometimes they're seeking the outer world to it's almost like the last little piece of validation to go, like, I have a right to this, but I'm also right. And not seeking the outside world to reflect back that you're right. Like, it's okay if you simply have the right to feel the way that you do without also having to be empirically right.
I'll just add one more thing here to the driver for INFPs. And we talk about this in the owner's manual a lot. When you're working on authenticity, understanding your own motivations and intentions is so important, because you understand why you're doing what you're doing. And you see that whole cocktail of emotions and motivations that's driving you. And you tune into that, you're like, wow, I'm honest. Yeah, there's some good stuff, some bad stuff. But the cool thing is when you start to tune into yourself and understand how you're motivated and you're really honest with yourself, you can start to read it in other people too. You can start to understand why people do what they do at a really core level. So tune into that. You can ask yourself, what do I want here? Why am I doing that? What's my desire? Why did I just do that behavior? I do it for all sorts of stuff. Like, why did I buy that kind of coffee versus that kind of coffee? That's weird. Wonder why. I ask myself these kind of questions. There's all sorts of stuff you can do. ENFP preferences for me. So I'm the similar functions, but the extroverted side of it all.
Well, and this helps an INFP understand that there is a combative element to the type that sometimes introverted feeling or authenticity won't own, that there is actually a bit of a desire to mess with people or mess things up or be combative or be competitive and under like really being honest with your motivations, really diving into that means owning that, like you might be doing something for a less noble reason than you think. It might just be a desire to enter combat, right?
And being okay with that.
Yeah.
That's the next level is go, and I just want to, so I'm going to. That's how I think. As long as it's not like hurting anyone or breaking the law or unethical, I'm like, well, I just want to. So yeah, I know society doesn't like it and it's not whatever, but you can give yourself permission to do the things that you feel like you want to do.
And then determine whether or not you actually want to do them. I think when the function glosses over those motivations and sees everything they're doing as noble, even if it's not, even if that's actually not the motivation or intention, then there's no ability to honestly self-assess whether or not the person wanted to do that to begin with. Because if everything you're doing is noble and doesn't require any sort of actual inquiry, right? Like you're always doing things for the right reasons, then you could be doing things that you actually don't want to be doing, right? Like you don't get to that level of going like, oh, that doesn't feel good, because you're glossing over everything with everything I'm doing is right and just.
Yeah.
And so that motivation piece is really important.
I feel like we've been hard on INFPs already. Like, are we being too, you're doing this wrong and doing that wrong? I think there's a lot of, I don't know. I can't remember what we just said because I'm in the flow of it all. But I just want to make sure INFPs don't get the message that we're saying this is a problem. This part of you is not a problem. This is the best part of you. This is the heroic part of you. This is an amazing part of you. We're just talking about some things to watch out for. And I just want to make sure you don't get the message that like it's all bad. You got to fix everything. Make sure you're doing this. Make sure you're doing that. There's a lot of great stuff here.
Well, we're talking about setting high expectations.
Exactly.
And so we're not saying that INFPs have not done this.
Of course.
And we're not saying you, the listener, you should be doing this and this and this. We're saying this, not doing this might be obstructing your ability to receive love from yourself.
Yep.
Like to clear the channel of love for the self, deeper inquiry is required.
Yep.
And I don't think that that's something that INFPs don't want to hear, because self-inquiry is something that they might have even gotten trained out of.
Yeah.
Like, don't navel gaze, you're being self-centered, etc. And it's like, no, keep doing that. Go further, keep digging, go as deep as you can. Understand yourself to an ascended level. Because when you do that, then now you can ameliorate the self. Now you can become the best version of yourself. Now you can determine whether or not this is the kind of person you want to be, and watch yourself become better and better and transform and get into like authentic personal development. Yeah. I don't think that this is us being hard on them. I think it's like cheerleading them on to do the thing that they already want to be doing.
Fantastic. I just want to make sure, because I just want to like, I want to make sure that goes. And here's the thing. Authenticity is not enough. All the stuff that you just mentioned, going deep, understanding all that, tuning into your motivations, your core desires, why you're actually doing what you're doing. That empathy thing I talked about, or sympathy thing I talked about earlier, where you're tuning into to another person and you're going, okay, I've been I've never gotten an Academy Award, but I got a trophy in baseball when I was 7. So I kind of understand what that must feel like up on stage. I can get the emotion. Oh, that's why they're excited or crying or whatever's going on for them. I've had a similar enough experience. And I mentioned earlier when we're talking about this authenticity process, I'm like, you got to have a lot of reference experiences. You got to have a lot of reference experiences to make sure you can understand what you're feeling and how you're feeling about all of them, so that when you're engaging, when you have a similar experience later in life, or you run into somebody that's having an experience, you can approximate it. This is where the co-pilot comes in. Exploration, technically called extroverted intuition. This is the part of you as an INFP that expands the territory and puts you into situations and experiences that get you the depth of emotion, that increase the depth and nuance of your authenticity, because you're expanding the territory. You're going out and you're testing things in the real world. You're getting out of your house and your shell, and you're going out and trying stuff, and it's carbonating your life, and you're learning and you're growing and you're imagining and you're trying things and you're experimenting. And just that alone is exciting because it furthers your life and it drives you forward, but also it's feeding back into your driver. It's giving you more reference experiences to know how things made you feel, how they struck you, what you were motivated by, what you weren't motivated by, what you were turned on about, turned off to. All of these things is important information, but unless you get out there and put yourself in these situations, you're never going to know that about yourself. You can't just sit there. You're going to tell yourself you could just do it in your bedroom at home or on the computer. I can explore from my laptop or my phone. I'm fine. You have to get out there and put yourself in these situations to get this learning. So we're going to talk about high expectations here too, Antonia.
Yes.
Very important part for an INFP.
Yes. Well, and this is also a place of certainty for people with INFP preferences, extroverted intuition. And like you said, it's pattern recognition. So an INFP needs to have high expectations for this function. Now, the function is, it's that effervescent love of life. Like I always call it, I think of this function as being carbonated, right? It's like, it's hopeful, it's optimistic, it's possibility thinking. It asks what if questions, right? What's possible? And it helps people with INFP preferences avoid getting too lost inside themselves and almost like I don't know, like if you do all that self-inquiry, which I'm actually encouraging INFPs to do a lot of self-inquiry, there's still a fear of being sort of trapped inside and maybe seeing the dark parts and wondering if there's any hope for humanity if we all have this darkness inside of us. And it's the co-pilot function of exploration, of extroverted intuition that goes, yes, we do have hope. And so this is, it's really important to have high expectations for this function because it doesn't just have an idealistic concept of hope or it doesn't turn the INFP into a fantasist. It turns them into somebody who has hope and then can imagine how to make that happen. Think of it as a function that also allows an INFP to become cross-disciplinary, attracted to different models and systems, attracted to different ways of approaching the world. It thinks outside the box. It helps with creative problem solving. It helps with not just imagining a good future, but like, how would we make that happen? What would be some of the ways that we could approach it? Asking questions like, where would we go if we didn't have to start from here? Is a very extroverted intuition or exploration question.
Also helps with expression. It helps you express yourself because it finds creative ways to connect things for people, so it lands with them. Even if you are an INFP a lot of INFPs are great with words and they can write really well or be articulate, but even if you're not, you're more expressive through vocalizations or performance in some way. This part of you can come in and help your authenticity express itself. It colors it and flavors it and brings it life.
Right. Well, and the better it gets, the more it can tap into a form of channeling. And that could be through performance. And like you mentioned, it could be through expression or articulation. This is a function that does really well when it's thinking on its feet. It loves brainstorming and it loves hearing itself say things to determine whether or not that sounds right. It is a form of faith that the right word will be there for you when you need it. It's laying train tracks in front of a train while it's in motion. And when people with INFP preferences have high expectations for this function, it gives them an ability to express beyond most other tools. Now, what's interesting about this function is in our friend and colleague, Dr. John Beebe's model, he says that there's a particular archetypal energy that's associated with the copilot or the auxiliary function. And he calls it parental energy. So when you think of a parent, you think of, and we've mentioned this on all of the podcast episodes, but you think of somebody who's willing to show up, be responsible, take care of others without asking anything in return. Parents give a lot and don't expect a lot back. That's part of the magic of being a parent. And there's an intrinsic reward in all of that, right? And there has to be, otherwise you would stop doing it because it's kind of a thankless job being a parent. And yet there's a reward simply by being able to show up for your kids or show up for people in this way. So if you take that energy, that concept of giving without necessarily asking for anything in return, but getting an intrinsic reward from it, and then associate it with this function that's hopeful and optimistic and thinks outside the box and is cross-cultural and cross-disciplinary, how would an INFP really show up with high expectations with this function? Well, part of it isn't, it's not just using the function, it's using it in behalf of other people. It's parenting with it. And that usually shows up as being hopeful for others. So it's not uncommon for INP types to say that somebody comes up to them and goes, I just don't have a vision for my life. I just don't know where I'm going. I'm not sure how to, or I have this problem. I don't know how to solve it. That's a sentence that activates this function for people who have INFP preferences. And all of a sudden they find like all of these outside the box, solutions to the problem, or they go, well, have you tried this and this and this? And don't worry about it. I think it's going to work out. And it's like this, as we mentioned, this effervescence that comes out, and the other person goes away feeling like, yeah, I think I could probably, I think I can handle this. That's part of setting high expectations, is modeling what it looks like to be willing to do, to solve problems in unusual ways, and giving yourself permission to do that. Giving yourself permission to think in, these different patterns. I guess you could say it almost being a weirdo, like giving yourself permission to be a weirdo and giving other people permission to do the same thing. Giving people permission to, to not just go with what is the usual protocol on something, but really think about it in a very, very different way. I think of our friend Dan, who has been on our podcast multiple times. Dan has INFP preferences, and at a certain point, he just gave himself permission to not live like everybody else. And so now he does through hikes. We have quite a few episodes interviewing Dan. We interviewed him after he hiked the full Appalachian Trail, and then the full Pacific Crest Trail. I want to say that we had him give a talk when he did the Continental Divide, and then he's just finished the through hike that connects New Zealand, both of the islands of New Zealand.
We'll have to have him back on.
We'll have to have him back on to talk about his experiences.
Do his 4th episode on this.
But he says he's now officially hiked 10,000 miles, right? And through hiked. It takes him months, right? It'll take him like 3/4 of a year to do these. And he just gave himself permission to do it. And now he models what it looks like to follow his passion, to follow this, this countercultural lifestyle that is very inspiring to other people. And that's part of how he showed a high expectation, or he set a high expectation for this function. And it asks a lot of him, right? He's been in near-death situations. He's been in harrowing situations multiple times, but he's also had these incredible moments, these incredible experiences. And so that's really parenting through modeling what it looks like to go, no, this is the life I'm going to live, even if other people don't understand it. And so you can, when an INFP sets a high expectation for this function, they use it in behalf of others with this parental energy, but then they also self-parent with it, right? They see a possibility for their future. They see how they could solve their problems in these unusual ways, outside the box thinking. And then it puts a pep in their step, right? There's like a buoyancy to people with INFP preferences that have really, really taken the bull by the horns with this function.
This also is a translator for an INFP between the best parts of who you are, the driver and the co-pilot, and those backseat functions. What's awesome about this part of you as an INFP is not only does it have that parental energy outward, you can turn it inward, which is the high expectation that you have, but you can also expect this to help you communicate with yourself, like inside of yourself. This is the part of you that can translate between your 10-year-old and 3-year-old and your driver and co-pilot. It's the part that all that passes through. It's kind of the air traffic control inside of your personality. And it's because of that, it's a very important function for, I think, that relationship with self in self-love. I think this is the part of you that can kind of help organize all the other parts in a way to be talking to each other and seeing the possibilities.
Yeah.
Anything else about this co-pilot before we jump into the 10-year-old?
I think just remembering that, like you said, it expands your emotional depth too, because it gives you more experiences that you can pull on in order to understand others. But it also helps you pattern what's going on for other people, even if you haven't personally experienced it. And so patterning is still very important here. And I just want to reiterate that it gives an INFP permission to be a bit of a weirdo. Like, they're allowed to do things their own way. And I think that it's very important for people with INFP preferences to give themselves that permission. And that's setting a high expectation, because it's not easy to do. It's not easy to live counterculturally. And yet it is still very important for them.
Well, that's all the good news. We can wrap this whole episode up then. There's nothing, there's no challenging news. Oh.
Yeah.
So we are going to talk about the challenging news. We're going to go to the 10-year-old behind the co-pilot. And, it's not terrible. It's not terribly challenging news. This is actually a really good part of an INFP. I think this is a part that you probably love about yourself in a lot of ways. You're like, wait, I can show myself love here all the time. There's no problem at all with this. But we are going to talk about expectations, because I think this part of you, a 10-year-old part of you, sometimes you can have too much expectation for it when it's not appropriate. I think that's really what happens here. It's not that you can't show yourself love from this part of yourself. I think it's pretty accessible. But then if you have too much high expectation and you quote unquote fail, or you don't meet the mark you've set for yourself, oh, I'm not worthy of love. Maybe I don't deserve this. I can't do it. And you beat yourself up. I think that's where it happens here a lot.
Yeah, I actually think all of this is the opposite of challenging news, because I think what it is it's giving people, like in every episode, permission to set their expectations according to their most likely capacity. And so
challenging news on its capacity and how high of an expectation you can expect from it.
That's true.
Right? I think that's what I mean.
I think people with INFP preferences tend to have too high of expectations for themselves here. And that definitely can create some demoralization. Yeah.
So if that co-pilot of exploration is all about expanding territory, again, breaking the pattern of, or looking for patterns and saying, what if we didn't have to start from here? What's possible? What's new? Untethered from what has been. This part of you, this memory part for an INFP, introverted sensing, technical name, it's all about what is precedent? What do I know? What has come before? What template can I tune to that I've already seen and other people have seen that I can rely on? I don't want to reinvent the wheel. I want to preserve what has been.
Yeah.
And that's important.
Yeah.
So let's talk about qualitatively, what are the expectations for this part of an INFP?
So as you mentioned, the function is very much tied into precedent. It's a function that understands the importance of processing experiences. So that's why we nicknamed it memory, is because it has when we have experiences as people, we have to process them. We have to understand them. We review and reevaluate them in order to pull out the right lessons, to understand what they mean, right? What they say about us as people who have experienced them. And so an INFP, though, having it as their 10-year-old or tertiary function, needs to have reasonable expectations of this function. And sometimes they do have too high of expectations. So reasonable expectations is you can cultivate a routine, right? Precedent is very much about having consistency. And an INFP can be consistent in their life. They can have a routine that they can follow. It might not feel great. Anybody who has this as a function further down doesn't really love the idea of having to stick with routines, in a slavish way, but you don't have to. But you can have a routine, and sometimes it's better to think of it almost like a rhythm. Right? You can have a rhythm that you employ in your life every day. You can have regular habits that help you feel grounded. You can have reflective practices that help you go through your experiences and again understand what they mean for you and your identity. And like you just did a thing. What did that mean, right? What does that say about me? What does it say about what my motivations and intentions were? Like, it's the same element of self-inquiry, but as opposed to that person made me feel this way, it's this is a thing I did, or this is a thing I experienced. So how did it help shape and form me as a person? And then understanding the changes you've made in your life. Introverted sensing or memory tracks changes over time. So you can track your changes and your growth. That's a reasonable expectation, as well as taking care of your body. It's a function that taps into changes of how we feel over time, which includes the sensory elements of it. It's introverted sensing. And so being tuned into how your body is feeling over time. So it's like, oh, I feel less, I have less energy than I used to. That would be a change you would track, right? And so you'd go, maybe I should do some things or some practices that will help me gain more energy. Or I feel like maybe my habits have slipped. It's tracking those kinds of things. So, employing and implementing healthy habits for your body. And those are all those are all reasonable expectations for this function. And then also being able to tap into things that are rewarding, that are maybe hobbies or the things that are just sort of interesting. And I think oftentimes, because this function is tied into the past, I've seen a lot of INFPs get into things that, like they don't just I don't know, like sew, they like crochet, or they learn how to dye clothes with flora, right? Like they're using plant life or something to be able to dye clothes.
Not just photography, but tintype photography or something maybe a little bit weird and also from the past.
Exactly. And so that it's okay to do all of that. That's a reasonable expectation, to find hobbies and crafts that, associate with past things and kind of help you understand the long history of humans and the technologies that we've been using over time. And then it's also a reasonable expectation that you can learn the right lessons, right? You can go over, review your experiences and take home the right lessons from those experiences. That's all very reasonable.
I think an unreasonable expectation, though, I'm guessing you're going there next.
I am.
Hey, remember I talked about expanding your territory and getting out and testing the world to increase your understanding of emotions? I think a lot of INFPs believe they can just do that at home with research from this part of themselves. Like, oh, I'll just tune into what's already been done and what we know. I'll read enough. I don't have to actually go experiment. I'll just read enough. I'll get a composite of all the known knowledge of this thing or whatever. That'll expand the depth of understanding or emotion around this.
Yep, right. Borrowed experiences.
I don't think, you can expect that of yourself, but I don't think it's going to work.
Yes.
I don't think you can replace experience with study or research.
Right.
I really don't.
Yeah. And the idea that you have everything you need and you don't need to go explore and you'll be a fulfilled person, I think that's an unreasonable expectation. In fact, most of the time when an INFP over relies on this part of who they are, they end up dampening their spirit.
Yeah.
And so to expect that the experiences that they've already had are enough, or to be able to borrow experiences from others will be enough, I think that's an unreasonable expectation for this function.
Or expecting when you do go in these adventures that it's going to be as comfortable as it was in the environment that you knew. Right? I'm comfortable at my home or my office or whatever I know. I'm comfortable there. I understand what's going on. And I expect that I'll be just as comfortable anywhere I am. I'll be able to recreate that comfort maybe, or be able to hold on to something that I know for certain, even in the midst of exploring something away from the certain.
Right. Or that it being as comfortable is a marker that this is the right action to take.
That's a good one.
So using comfort and safety and all of those markers
as a measurement tool
for, for whether or not this is the quote unquote right thing. This is to over rely on it as an instrument for decision making. That's an unreasonable expectation. It's kind of like making a 10-year-old, like the final call in family decisions. It's like, that's just too heavy a lift. Yeah. So it's an unreasonable expectation. And then I think an unreasonable expectation is that you're always going to be responsible and do the responsible thing, that you're going to have a perfect track record, that you're always going to be able to live up to the standards that other people set for you or the templates of life. And you can try, you can try your little chili pepper heart out, but you will not feel alive. Doing this will not, it's an unreasonable expectation that this part of you will help you feel as alive as the co-pilot of extroverted intuition or exploration.
Yeah. So let's talk about the childlike quality of this function. That 10-year-old, and the other thing that we have to know about this is exploration and memory, extroverted intuition and introverted sensing are polar opposites of each other. Mm-hmm. So it's almost like your co-pilot and your 10-year-old are on the opposite side of the spectrum. You could almost look at it like a coin, that when one side is up, the other side is down, and vice versa. And so it's almost like when you're in one, you're not in the other. Mm-hmm. And when you're in that, you're not in the first one. So that can create a little bit of a weird challenge in our personality. All of us have a version of this, but INFPs, it's that exploration with memory. And then the other piece of this is, just like that co-pilot has a parental energy, right? It's a parental energy that's focused outwardly. And the trick is, and that's what we talk about in the owner's manual for INFPs, is disciplining, training, and working on focusing that on yourself and self-parenting. And we all have to do that no matter who we are. That's what our co-pilot does for us. But just like that parent's focused outwardly, that 10-year-old's focused outwardly too. It's looking for approval in the outer world to say, oh, you're doing a good job with this. And again, just like with the parent turning outwardly toward inwardly, instead of looking to the outer world as this 10-year-old process, it really needs to look to the co-pilot and the driver, but mostly the co-pilot, to say, am I doing a good job? It's self-referencing, not outwardly referencing. Now, that's an instinct you're going to have to outwardly reference, and that can erode self-love, because if somebody tells you, this little 10-year-old part of your mind, you're not doing a good enough job, or you don't get the validation you want, well, I must not be lovable. I shouldn't love myself. So it can disrupt or distract from self-love if you're too focused on approval from the outside world.
Right, exactly. That's the strategy that everybody uses with their 10-year-old, that feeling of uncertainty. We try to smooth over the feeling or get back to a sense of certainty by receiving validation from the outside world. We call them head pats, right? A 10-year-old is seeking head pats.
We outsource it.
Mm-hmm.
Yeah.
Yeah. And so it's an unreasonable expectation that setting up your life to receive head pats from others for this function is going to be a good strategy. So you nailed it. Instead of looking to other people, what we do is we call integrate. You integrate introverted sensing or memory into extroverted intuition or exploration. And when you do that, the dynamic is as you just mentioned. It's the head pat comes from extroverted intuition or exploration. And so you take that coin you talked about, and as opposed to having, either heads up or tails up, right, and the other one is down, you spin it. And as the coin spins, you kind of can't tell which one is heads and which one is tails. They're working in conjunction with each other so well. And so a lot of that looks like both change, because extroverted intuition or exploration is a very disruptive, change-oriented function, right? It's always thinking about what's possible and willing to try a new thing. It's very novelty-seeking. So you take that concept of change, but then you also pair it with laying the tracks of stability and being able to integrate these new changes into your life if they're good ones, right? You review, okay, what does this change mean? How is it going to impact my life? How do I get my life back to a stable place? And but I don't want to get stable for too long, right? Because now I'm in a rut. So then I got to have change again. So it's just sort of a back and forth on those two things. So it's disruption at times without losing one's stability. Yeah. It's maintaining a sense of rootedness, a sense of groundedness, while at the same time thinking in terms of hope and optimism and possibilities for the future.
So anything else in the 10-year-old that we want to mention about expectations before we move on to the 3-year-old?
Just the note that there should be a reasonable expectation about the ability to track details.
Yeah.
There's a sense of being able to track all details, or not thinking you can track any detail. And there's the reasonable expectation is that you can track details, but not all, don't make it your career necessarily. Now, there's going to be some INFP that's I totally track details all the time, and it's okay if it's in a business context, but it's all right if you lose stuff. It's all right if you're not constantly and perpetually responsible all the time. Give yourself some grace and cut yourself some slack in this function. And then I'm going to mention before, when we were talking about extroverted intuition or exploration, the co-pilot, to give yourself permission to be a weirdo. This is a function that doesn't like being a weirdo. It does not like standing out.
The memory process, 10-year-old.
Introverted sensing or memory, that's right. The 10-year-old does not like to stand out unduly. And maybe will encourage somebody with INFP preferences to do a lot of blending in. And so you have a reasonable expectation for that too, that there's going to be a part of you that is very concerned or worried when you stand out for your, for your weirdness.
Yeah.
And give it some grace. Understand that it's just a little concerned about what that means, that it's not going to get approval for doing the thing that's the done thing or whatever, right? The template. But don't allow that to stop you from, being iconoclastic.
Yeah.
Being willing to do things outside the box. And that this part of you have the reasonable expectation that this part will panic a little bit maybe, or feel like really exposed. And that it will also be able to process the experience after it happens and get used to it. It can, this is a function that is the most flexible over time. So it can get used to you being a little bit more iconoclastic.
Yeah.
Eventually it will make room and space for that. And so have that expectation as well.
So moving on in an INFP's life, showing them self-love. Let's talk about the 3-year-old mental process. And again, in that car model we've pulled out of the INFP Owner's Manual, the 3-year-old is technically called extroverted thinking. Our nickname is effectiveness, and being effective. I mean, the word really sums it up. Getting things done, accomplishments, resource management, tracking, managing all the things that have to be managed in order to have an output in the real world, in the external world.
Yep.
That's really what this is focused on.
Yep.
But for an INFP, it has the certainty level of about a 3-year-old. And that's, I mean, you said, it's not all challenging. I think that's challenging. I think that's a big challenge, because if you are if you've been around in the world at any length of time, you know that our society, at least here in the West, values, and I'm not saying people not in the West, I just have experience in the West. I think everybody on the planet values actual real results, real things like running water and, streets that are functional and clean. Like everybody likes things that work and have output. So because of that, most jobs and most careers are focused on metrics and numbers and outputting and, being productive. Well, what if this is a deeply uncertain part of you? Are you supposed to just not be productive or have attunement to all of that? I think it's a little bit of a stressor for some INFPs. They don't know how they should feel about this. It feels important, and the world certainly rewards it. What kind of expectations can they have here?
Yeah. Well, and I would say this function really focuses on progress and impact.
Yeah.
And so there's a deep uncertainty around what is my impact? What progress am I making? Am I having the impact I want to have, or I'm intending to have? So because it is a deeply uncertain function. Now, we talked about the co-pilot and the 10-year-olds, right? That intuition and that sensing part, exploration and memory. That these are functions that tend to have, John calls them the axis of relating to others. So we talked about the parental energy of the co-pilot, and the 10-year-old function is called an internal child energy. So those are both facing other people. Whereas the driver function that we talked about before, introverted feeling or authenticity, and then this function of extroverted thinking and effectiveness, which are also a polarity opposite, it calls this the axis of relating to self, meaning that this is my relationship with me. I do these things for me. These are not done for others. They're done for me. So the uncertainty of the 10-year-old, because it is relating to other people, it tends to use other people to calm down that uncertainty. It looks for those head pats. But the 3-year-old function, the inferior function, because it's the axis of relating to self, even when it seeks approval from the outside world in order to feel that sense of certainty, it doesn't work, right? Other people cannot tell you you're doing a good enough job in order for this part to calm down and feel certain. So that deep uncertainty, it doesn't matter how good you're doing at it, that deep uncertainty doesn't go away. That's just a feature of it. Now, we as people always assume a feeling of uncertainty is a red flag. So we go, I feel uncertain here. I must be doing something wrong. And if we hate the feeling of uncertainty enough, which a lot of people do truly hate that feeling, then we'll push it out of our view, out of our sight. We'll just be like, this is a thing I do not want to look at. So some people with INFP preferences have a very distant relationship from this function. They don't even want to look at it. It's not that they do it and feel uncertain, it's like they avoid it at all costs if they can get away with it, because that feeling of uncertainty is so uncomfortable. There are some INFPs that have made space for that feeling of uncertainty and they do it anyway. They may have had to, right? There are some INFPs that are, that sort of like allow other people to subsidize their life. And there are other INFPs who are the people who are doing the subsidizing, right? They're the breadwinner. They're the person who is making sure everything happens. And so they've had to learn how to make peace with that feeling. And those are two very different styles of INFP. So there's certain it's good to know what expectations a person can have for this function, so that they are stepping into it. They're not completely avoiding it, but at the same time, they're not beating themselves up when they're not performing at a certain level that maybe they're seeing people around them perform at. So what's the reasonable expectation? Well, the reasonable expectation is that you can have basic organizational skills, right? You can do basically most of the jobs that other people do. That you can get things done, right? That you can make things happen, that you can have impact, and you can make progress in your life, right? And even if it's slow progress, that you can have progress in the things that you're doing. That you can make decisions based on analysis and not just on personal feelings, but you can also make decisions based on logical analysis and resource management. And that you are a person who can have clear communication and candor, right? You can talk to people, you can actually explain things in a way that they can understand. Not just, like try to explain and communicate those deep esoteric and feeling-based parts, but you actually can break things down and go, no, this is actually what's going on for me. This is how it works. Or just explain how something works in general. So candor, clear communication, those are all reasonable expectations. Problem solving, right? Being able to set and achieve goals. These are all things that are reasonable. And I think one thing that is also a reasonable expectation, that when an INFP doesn't do this, they do themselves a real disservice, which is figuring out how to handle criticism. So almost everything feels very personal to people with these preferences. And criticism can feel deeply personal. It can feel very hurtful. It can feel like an attack. But this function, when an INFP builds a good relationship with it and sets reasonable expectations, can get to a point where they realize that constructive criticism is actually very helpful.
Yeah.
And it doesn't have to be perceived as a personal attack. It can actually be perceived as somebody attempting to help or to calibrate or something that you're actually welcoming, right? You can get to a place where you welcome constructive criticism. Those are all reasonable expectations.
I think one thing that INFPs do struggle with, effectiveness. It's about measurements, how well you're doing, how much output and impact and results and progress you've made. I think it'd be deeply painful if you and who you are feels like it's being measured by how much you're making an impact or how much progress you're making. And if you get the message from the world, like that's the value you provide. You provide value as an INFP by what you do, not by who you are, but what you can do in this job role, in this family, in this circumstance or situation. And I think for INFPs, it's like, really? You're going to reduce me down to how much output I have in the world, or how many results I can get, or how many metrics I can hit? There's a whole bunch of rest of me that I'm bringing to the table here, right? And so I think there's an expectation here of understanding, okay, the world's going to measure me that way. But having a good relationship and that self-love channel open to say, I do know my value and worth, though, even if I'm not getting the message back from the world. I can't expect this part of myself to get the approval or the feedback, and it wouldn't work anyway because it's a 3-year-old, it's access of self, right? But I can't expect this part of me to feel good about, even if everybody gives me great feedback, I can't expect it to feel good about who I am because I'm way more than just what I can do.
Right.
And I think INFPs struggle with this sometimes.
Yeah.
And, I have a lot of it too in me. It's like, why am I valued on what I do? Why can't I be valued on who I am? And I think INFPs understand that about themselves. And I think that is, if they get the message that they can only love themselves based on what output they have by hitting metrics, that's going to disrupt or erode self-love. So with the expectation that you are not Your self-love is not dependent on what you do. I think that is an inappropriate expectation here at the 3-year-old level, for INFP specifically.
I agree. So an unreasonable expectation is that you're going to be able to self-assess entirely based on your impact and your metrics.
That's a very nice thinker way to say it, yes.
And at the same time, I think it's a reasonable expectation to meet the world halfway.
Yeah.
So to be able to provide value, to be able to interface with the world, to be able to communicate with it and provide value, and to be able to have an impact. Those are also important things for an INFP to feel self-love, right? One of the channels, or one of the things that will obstruct the channel of self-love, is not having any impact, because this is part of your axis of relating to self. You want to make an impact in the world. That's important to you. It's not just that the world is demanding it of you. It's like you actually want to offer value. You want to be able to be a person who makes progress in the world and watches yourself, to positively impact it. So that is that's a reasonable expectation to have an impact, to want to have an impact, to understand how other people measure value and show up in a way that doesn't just make you feel good, but also makes other people feel good in that channel of value. That's important. But to believe that your entire value falls on your ability to impact the world, that it's not just what you're, it's that you're a human doing, that's an unreasonable expectation. So to remember that being a human being is a more important component, right? For you as an individual, for you as an INFP, you will be measuring more on who you are than what you're doing. And don't forget what you're doing, right? That's also a piece of it. It is important. So to get that balance right, and it will be individual, by the way. Not every INFP will have the same algorithm going.
Yeah.
For some INFPs, more impact in the outside world, measurable impact, is going to be important to them. Maybe just how they were raised, or maybe that's part of their value set, right? It's very subjective. So that self-inquiry element that we talked about with the driver will have to also include, how much am I personally measuring my value and worth based on my impact? And is that what I want it to be? And you might have lowballed it. You might want to actually have more impact than you do now. And that might not be something you want to look at because it doesn't make you feel very good. If you're honest, though, you can step up into that. You can step up into being in alignment with the kind of impact you want to be making. And you can make those changes over time, grow into it. And now the channel of love, receiving love from self, is now open, because there's not a part of you that's in dissonance, like going like, I should be making more impact, but not wanting to look at it. And for others, it might be lower than they're doing. Maybe they believe that their impact on the world, their ability to make money, or their ability to climb a corporate ladder, or their ability to, be an industry leader in their craft, or whatever it is, right? Their ability to be, an advocate that changes the world. They might be sort of overreaching and thinking, this is my value and worth, is to be able to do all that. And then through honest self-inquiry go, actually, I don't really feel like I have to change the world. That's not honest for me. I'm not sure where I picked that up. And so then they bring their expectations for their impact to a more reasonable level, and now they're happier. So it's really about understanding what you want your impact to be, and to be honest about it. Are you overreaching and that's causing demoralization? Are you lowballing it and that's causing disappointment in the self? That's something that you have to determine, but it is something that has to be determined. And so that's the reasonable expectation setting we're talking about.
Anything else in the 3-year-old before we move on?
Just that the communication piece is important here. So we talk about how you can, just like with the co-pilot and the 10-year-old having that spinning coin, there's also a spinning coin version of the driver and the 3-year-old of authenticity and effectiveness. I just hinted at it, which is, self-assess and be honest with the self about the impact one wants to make, and how that communicates value. And when you get that right, when you integrate the impact you want to make in the world into your value set and your self-assessment, that's part of spinning the coin, right? You kind of can't tell where one begins and the other one ends. But the other element, and this is very important for self-confidence, I think, and self-trust, is the component of candor that comes along with extroverted thinking or effectiveness. It's a function that doesn't just do things, but also it gets good at explaining things. And it understands how things happen in a linear progression. That includes, like basically how we operate as people. We also operate in a linear way as humans, right? We do this and then we do this and then we do this. And so somebody with INFP preferences can get better and better at communicating with candor and laying out a case, right? They can like basically argue a case for why they're showing up the way they are, why things are happening the way they are. And that allows them to be a lot more assertive when they learn that art of communication, not running away from conflict, right? Maybe that's the challenge. The challenge is that they don't want to be candid because they don't want people mad at them, or they don't want to be candid because they don't want to have to be pinned down, or they don't want to be responsible for something now, right? There's lots of different reasons why they might avoid candor. And yet candor is so important because what it does is it keeps the person with INFP preferences from being passive aggressive. Yeah. And passive aggressiveness is very eroding to your own personal sense of self-confidence. If you can't say something directly, and you're using passive aggressiveness as like almost like a coping mechanism through life, you'll find yourself not feeling like you have a right to stand up for yourself, almost like you have to sneak it. So that sense of self-trust, like I've got my own back, that sense of having boundaries, that permission you give yourself to speak up, and not doing it in a reactive way where you are attacking the person, like you're becoming too aggressive, but you're also not sort of sneaking it in a passive aggressive way, but just communicating directly. That is such a key for people with INFP preferences to build their self-confidence, to build that sense of self-certainty and self-assuredness. And I think that really does help integrate that 30-year-old function and keep the coin spinning.
I think that's where the social boundaries come from. This ability to speak with candor where your boundaries are. And then you don't feel like you've been taken advantage of, or there was some fuzzy areas, and now all of a sudden you build resentment, and then you blow up, or you get frustrated, you shrink away and you run away, or whatever your specific style of recoiling or attacking happens there. But I think that's what happens is we're like, I'll just let that go. It's not that big a deal. And we're not honest or candid with what's going on for us. And then all of a sudden we have a boundary cross and we get upset or we get hurt. And I think that just solves that by being candid with this part of yourself.
Or staying in a bad situation for too long.
Yeah.
Right. Letting yourself being taken advantage of.
Yeah.
Right. The part of that is just you're not being candid with yourself.
Yeah.
Right. And so going I don't have to put up with this.
Yeah.
I can just make a decision that's right for me.
Yeah.
And it's okay if there's fallout, that fear of making bad impacts. Right. And like going, well, maybe I just have to stay here because I'm uncertain about the impact I'll make. Well, what if you get to stand up for yourself? What if you get to make decisions that are right for you? And at the same time, honestly considering impact, like you don't also want to be the kind of person that bounces the first time something gets hard. So you want to have that balanced, right? And both stand up for yourself, but at the same time also clock the impact. And that's part of that. That's part of that spinning coin integration.
So let's talk about what the rest of us can learn from the INFP self-love. Like if an INFP has done what we've talked about, they've set different expectations for different parts of themselves. And we're looking at the CAR model that we've pulled out of the INFP Owner's Manual course. And by the way, if you're an INFP, I'll just say this. You need to go over to personalhacker.com and get the INFP Owner's Manual. It goes into some of the concepts we've talked about just, quickly on this podcast. It's a whole thing, right? Videos, audios, PDFs, training. It's incredible. It will set you up through the lens of personality on a life that's going to be a rich life, showing yourself love, on your purpose, all those things. So go over and get yourself an INFP Owner's Manual. It's going to be, and there's one for every type, by the way. So any type has one of these. I cannot recommend it enough. But from that Owner's Manual, we've gone ahead and pulled out the car model, and we looked at the car model. Imagine your mind as a 4-passenger car, driver, co-pilot, 10-year-old and 3-year-old. And we've talked about the expectations you should have in each of these areas. For the driver of authenticity for INFPs, high expectations, 110% expectation. You can grow this part of yourself, stretch it. For the co-pilot of exploration, moderate, but pretty high expectations. Like, be judicious, but yeah, stretch this part of yourself. This is an avenue, and we talk about this in the Owner's Manual too. We give specific disciplines and exercises and focus on this because it's so important, that translator part of you. Grow your co-pilot, focus on it. it will give you the biggest bang for your buck, and it's going to stretch and grow your personality in ways that it's going to be awesome for you if you tune to it. So high expectations for those. The 10-year-old of memory, moderate expectations. Reasonable expectations, right? Reasonable. And then the 3-year-old, you need to have lower expectations for that 3-year-old process of effectiveness because it's deeply uncertain, certainty of a 3-year-old. So we talked about that in the Now, let's assume the INFP has gone through all the advice we've given them. They've gotten the owner's manual. They've gone deep into their type. They've worked on themselves, and they are a mature, growing INFP that's on their purpose of life, right? They're on their life path of life.
They've cleared all the channels of self-love. Right. They're receiving love.
They're sending love to themselves. They're able to receive it. They feel good about themselves. Right. What's something that the rest of us, all the other 15 types, can learn from an INFP that is dialed in self-love in this way?
Yeah. So the qualities and characteristics that come from an INFP that has mastered this, right? They receive love from themselves. They set reasonable expectations. They've developed that good relationship. They've earned it. They've earned a good relationship. It means that they're going to be balancing personal integrity with practical effectiveness, right? They're going to be aligned. Their behavior and their impact and results are going to be aligned with their personal values and their authenticity and their integrity. And at the same time, they're going to have dialed in the capacity to be very flexible and adaptable and open to disruption and stable at the same time and rooted in themselves. So there's actually a word that I discovered in doing research for this podcast, and the word is equipoise. So I'm calling it self-assured equipoise.
Equipoise.
It's a portmanteau. A portmanteau is like two words shoved together. So it's a portmanteau of the word equilibrium and poise. Right? So there's an equilibrium, this ability to be in alignment with self, the ability to kind of roll with the punches and be adaptable, the ability to grow and stretch and be outside of one's comfort zone, while at the same time keeping poise. Right. And so it's equipoise. It's the ability to be adaptable, but at the same time grounded. The ability to stay in alignment with one's values, but have the impact that you're looking for. And the entire time have that sense of confidence that we talked about, right? The confidence that comes from integrating the thinking part where you're communicating with assertiveness. You're not being passive aggressive, that you are able to self-assess your value and without outsourcing it to other people. And the ability to roll with the punches and be adaptable and have adventures and have the joie de vivre of life without feeling unmoored by it.
So we don't do celebrity typing. And here I go. No, we teach profiler training,
right.
Personality profiler training, which teaches people how to have a conversation. It's a whole thing. And you sit down with another person, you help them determine their best fit personality type. So we're like, typing can be fun. Looking at videos online or watching people from a distance and guessing or speculating on their personality type. That can be fun, but we don't think it's very useful in a clinical or coaching or therapy session or anything like that because you don't really know their personality type. You're just speculating.
It ends up being distracting to the rest of the content because then people hone in on it and want to argue about a celebrity type as opposed to like taking personal growth principles.
Yeah. So taking all that into consideration, I have a suspicion that this person I'm going to mention has INFP preferences. So you and I, in the last few weeks, went to the 50th anniversary of an old radio show that I used to listen to as a teenager called the Prairie Home Companion. It's a dude by the name of Garrison Keillor. He's like in his early 80s now. I think he's like 81 or something. He'd done this for 50 years, and this is his 50th anniversary tour. And I have a suspicion. I don't know. I've never personally profiled him, and I don't know of anybody that has. I suspect, though, just how he shows up to the world, that he probably has INFP preferences, or I can make an argument for that. Again, I wouldn't go fighting over this with anybody. I don't care that much.
That are being
I don't care that much. It's a thought experiment. So I look at him on stage doing this 50th anniversary radio show, basically. He brings out like old-timey radio actor type people and sound effects. And it's like a weird, anachronistic experience. You're watching 1930s radio being produced at the time of this recording. And so it's weird to kind of see, but it's fun. And you watch all this. And I was watching him play with his sound effects guy. One of the bits that he had done, he had written this sketch where he was going to tell this story and about the sound effects man and how long he's been with him, because it's 50th anniversary. And then the sound effects man was going to make all the noises and the sound effects with his voice and all the tools that he has there to go along with the story.
Well, the story was going to present different things that were happening that the sound effects guy had to spontaneously keep up with. So if he said the word like helicopter, that was a cue for the sound effects guy
in the story. So he had to make the noises that is going on in the story, right? Hence sound effects. Maybe that wasn't clear. I don't know. You're like explaining it more than I explained. I'm like, was I dumb how I explained sound effects working?
Well, I meant like it was impromptu. It's improvisational.
So that's what I was getting to that. So skit is set up and he goes off script. So you jump the gun. You jump my punchline. That's okay.
I'm sorry.
That's all right. My introverted feeling is mad about it, but I'm all right. I'll get over it. I got to deal with this emotion. It's all right. So he goes off script and he starts messing with the guy. And it was funny because he starts combining things like a helicopter with like a volcano exploding and then being dropped in the ocean with like rapid succession. And
with
so he's
pterodactyl egg.
Yeah, he's like trying to keep up with this. And you can just feel that he's gone off script into more of this intuitive kind of almost exploration place, just picking things out of the air and expanding on them and continuing. And it was funny to watch the dynamic. And yet this entire show is rooted in like old timey radio. And he writes these scripts and there's like interesting dynamics happening and it's funny and there's comedy and all of this. And when he does his kind of monologue at the end, the news from Lake Wobegon, he calls it, I think he's got a couple bullet points, but a lot of it he's just kind of, I think he's making it up and riffing as he goes. And I believe it's watching an INFP, very mature in his life, operating from all the different parts of his personality. He's in performance with his authenticity. He's expanding and playing with things with his exploration. He's rooted in history and what has come before with old-timey radio and kind of an old-timey radio setup. And then he's made a career out of this. He's actually made money and he's got like merchandising. He owns like all this IP and intellectual property that he's merchandised and written books, and he's probably a multimillionaire through all of this.
They've gone on tour for 50 years.
Yeah.
And that's not an easy thing to do.
Yeah. And he's been hired by Hollywood. I think he's in like Ken Burns movies to do like voiceovers and stuff because he's, voice actor. So he's architected a life, I believe, as an INFP that just speaks to all these parts of himself. And it's really interesting to watch him move through this. And I think that's a model of me. When I look at that, again, speculating he's an INFP, I'm like, that's an INFP in a proficiency of performance and output and expression.
Yeah. That's
a person who has dialed all this in that we're talking about. And it's neat to watch because I think that he has that equipoise. I think he is rooted and has a ballast of life. And yet he, from that ballast, almost like a balloon tethered to something, he can fly around and be creative in the process. But you can kind of tell he's introverted and he's kind of, he would be more reticent, but he's put himself out there enough that he stretched this. So again, I just wanted to bring that up as an example. I think that's an example of somebody that has that equipoise in life. Whether he's an INFP or not, I believe, and it's available to all of us because we're all learning about equipoise no matter what our type is.
Yeah.
I believe it's available to all of us, and I think he's got it.
Yeah, I agree with that. All right, do you forgive me?
No, I'm going to hold a grudge. That's good.
I'm afraid all of the people with FP preferences will be mad at me in your behalf.
Yeah, I hope so. I hope I get some backing. I hope passive aggressively can get some backing on this one and stick it to you. Hey, how many times have I interrupted you or disrupted one of your stories or something you've said? So I walk into a room, any room I walk into, assuming that room existed when I walk into it. And so I have a tendency to be in process of expression as I enter a space, and people have, particularly you, reflected to me that's not always okay.
Well, I will say this. I think that would be surprising to some people because I do quite a bit of talking on the podcast, but in real life, it's
only the podcast.
It's in reverse, actually.
That's true.
Like, in real life, I think that I would say that you do more talking than I do by quite a bit.
At this point.
Maybe as we age, the tables will
I'm
turn.
that old man that just doesn't stop talking, just keeps going. When I get older, I'll just be
when
that
you get
output.
older.
Oh, thanks, Antonia.
And I know we're just about to wrap up, but I want to thank you. You made a little comment about it earlier, but I want to thank you for getting through this entire episode. Well, I can tell you're getting sicker.
Yeah. I'm not feeling great, but I'm doing it anyway.
You're doing it anyway. So if you've been on the video version, you might see Joel's eyes getting kind of glassy. I can tell that you're probably not feeling very good. So we should probably wrap it up.
All right, let's do that.
Okay.
So first things, head over to personalityhacker.com. You got to get an INFP owner's manual for your personality, or if you're another type. I'm telling you, it's a great place to start. It'll change your life. Start there. That's the first step in all of this. Of course, we've got programs like our Personality Life Path Mentorship, our Profiler Training. We have more advanced programs and trainings and all of that stuff. But man, the owner's manual is the place to start as far as I'm concerned.
It's your kickoff point.
Yeah. Also, we've had 2 microphones here. Each of us have been talking to you, our third person in this conversation, but you haven't had a microphone. So we want to hear from you. Come over to personalityhacker.com after you get your owner's manual. Make a comment below this episode. Tell us what's coming up for you. A question, a comment. Share your story. If you're an INFP that's been through this self-love journey and you've resonated with some of the things we've talked about, we'd love to hear from you. Maybe you're still struggling with some of these things, or they've been challenging for you. We'd like to hear that too, because it's important that we get a conversation starting about this. Everybody's in different places in their life. Everybody's in different timelines, different stations, different upbringings, different cultures and backgrounds. So not every INFP is going to have the same experience, clearly. Your voice matters. Come over and make it heard underneath this podcast.
And if you enjoyed this podcast, you can subscribe to us on iTunes and various Android platforms. Please, please, please leave us a rating and review on iTunes, particularly your review. I realized just how much that feedback help fuels these episodes. So if you leave a review on iTunes, I promise I'll read it. And it gives a little adrenaline shot in the heart to help keep us going. You might be watching us on YouTube right now because we have a YouTube podcast or video podcast, I guess you could say. You can also like, subscribe, and hit the bell to let you know when future episodes come out. And as Joel mentioned, you can leave a comment there as well to talk about your experience and what you do as somebody with INFP preferences to evidence that equipoise. We have a book. It's called Personality Hacker. You can get it at all major book retailers. If you leave us a rating and review on Amazon or on Goodreads, that also helps us out a lot. And as Joel mentioned, you can get a copy of the Owner's Manual. The INFP Owner's Manual talks not just about your personality type, but also some psychological phenomena that comes out of those cognitive functions, the CAR model that we talked about. And the Owner's Manual helps you understand how to get and stay in flow. It helps you understand some of maybe your less desirable phenomena and how to get over it and to get to the other side. And it also talks a little bit about some fixations and gives you a whole toolbox to help deal with that. So head over to personalityhacker.com and grab an Owner's Manual.
One thing I didn't mention earlier that I do need to sneak in here. I know we're wrapping up. I didn't say it. It's in my notes. I was so focused on the weird word that we picked. Equipoise.
Equipoise.
Don't forget that self-love is love, and love is a verb, meaning that it's not just enough to say, I love myself. Being a verb, it's action-oriented.
Yeah.
You have to express love by doing something. You can't just think it or feel it for yourself. You express it by doing something. You act upon that love. So just keep that in mind as you're finding an avenue of self-love for yourself as an INFP or any type. It requires you to do something. It requires action to reflect that back to yourself. I think it's an important point. I want to lay back, at the very end of this episode to make sure we get it in the recording. It's important we don't forget that it requires us to do something to show ourselves love.
Yeah.
My name is Joel Mark Witt.
And I'm Antonia Dodge.
And we'll talk with you on the next Personality Hacker Podcast.